Dobro večer, dobri ljudi, dobrodošli u još jednu besjedu o obrazovanju. Apsolutno zadovoljstvo i privilegija da večeras imamo jednog sjajnog gosta, zahvaljujući Jasminku Haliloviću iz Muzeja ratnog djetinjstva, koji nam je omogućio da večeras razgovaramo sa jednim od ljudi koji je metodologije, ideje o tome kako se teške stvari poučavaju i šire među djecom sa jednom dobrom notom, sa jednom dobrom namjerom, uspio da uspostavi širom svijeta. Naš uvaženi gost večeras je Driel, negdje između Holandije i Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Uvaženi Barry je bio i generalni sekretar i sad je generalni sekretar Internacionalne asocijacije za interkulturalno obrazovanje, također glavni urednik akademskog žurnala Interkulturalno obrazovanje, neko ko se bavi razvojem kurikuluma, neko ko se bavi treningom za nastavnike, što je predivno, tako da ćemo imati većinu zajedničkih tema i radio je kao neko ko je razvio kurikulum i trening za nastavnike u sklopu Kuće Anne Frank, globalno poznatog interaktivnog muzeja u kojem je glavna tematika Anna Frank i koncept Drugog svjetskog rata. Neko ko mnogo radi na predrasudama, obrazovanju, multikulturalnim društvima, ljudskim pravima i tako dalje. Uglavnom, u svakom slučaju, ogromno zadovoljstvo da ga imamo večeras. Dear Mr. Barry, welcome back to Bosnia and Herzegovina. And welcome to
thank
this
you.
show.
Hvala. Thank you so much.
This is not your first time that you're here.
No, it's been 21 years since I was last year. I was here quite often between the years of 1995 and 2000. And I was working at that time with War Child and the Poverty Music Center, working with young people in Razno, here in Sarajevo. And we were doing a variety of workshops with young people and the teachers, doing project-based work with the young people. We were doing drama and theater and education. We were doing poetry slam. We had a traveling exhibition that dealt with the history of the Second World War. So the core of that, I was working with the Anne Frank House. The core of that was dealing with the story of Anne Frank, the history of the Second World War and the Holocaust, and then with a component that dealt with what was happening here in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in the region at that time, which was a real challenge, I have to say, coming right after the war and all the trauma, all the emotions, all the pain that people were going through at that time, and now in retrospect, if you look back, if I look back some 20-some years, maybe some of that was really a little bit too early for the kind of work that we wanted to do around the exhibition and around content. I think the work with the drama and education, the poetry slam, was extremely successful for perhaps a limited number of young people and their teachers as well. And in any case, I just also want to say that we have a short amount of time today. I really appreciate being invited here and being able to have this discussion. I don't see this as the final discussion. The plan is for me to come here more often in the future, and it's a way of, for me, kind of visiting some of the roots that I put out here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and continue to have a conversation with you and also a conversation with educators in this country, hoping that I can offer a little bit of insight after the many years I've been in the field now.
Perfect. And what do you see now instantly when you came back after 20-some years?
I see, in terms of the physical nature of the city, I still see some bullet holes and where shells impacted buildings. And I think that's a reminder of the past of this city and the past of this country. I wasn't sure if I was going to still see that. But I see also a new energy in the city. I see that life has continued. And also, if I remember meeting with teachers in around the year 2000, and we had the Anne Frank exhibition that went to different cities, and maybe some of the listeners saw the exhibition. And I had the teachers go through the exhibition. And this was, of course, again, the exhibition on the Second World War and the Holocaust and that conflict mostly. And I asked the teachers, I didn't want to, let's say, do a workshop around it. I just had them go through the exhibition and look at that particular conflict. And I asked them, so when you go through that exhibition, which details what happened now some 75 years ago, what is the educational message that for your young people, if they go through that exhibition? And I remember the teacher saying very clearly, and they really agreed with each other, they said, you know, if we look at that particular history of the Second World War, and we see all the devastation that took place in so many countries and cities being bombed and destroyed, and of course that now today reminds us what is happening in the Ukraine. When we see that, we realize that Europe was able to basically rebuild itself. So there is hope for the future, that we can do this if we come together. We can do this as a society, and we can also do this as educators with our children. So this is what we take away from that exhibition. And I see now, I've only been here a couple of days now, but I see some of that energy of moving forward, of providing a good life for young people in this society, and working with young people to help them become active and responsible citizens. And I'm really happy to see that that's happened here.
I would love to see Bosnia from your eyes.
Okay.
I as an optimist, as a person who believes that only utopian thinking can change the world, while I'm getting older and older and living here in Bosnia.
You're still younger than me.
Younger than you. But I'm becoming skeptical about some things. But
sure.
I will start with the one question that come up when we start talking about you and having you here between colleague me and you. When we talk about Second World War and Holocaust, we have some global understanding and consensus about data's facts, what happened, and so on and so on. How is that different comparing to Bosnia and Herzegovina, when we have three narratives about the same war? How different is it, and how hard is it to start any kind of methodology teaching about conflict, and more important, what we have taught children about it, what kind of children we want after that process? How do you see it?
Well, first, if you look back at the Second World War, I think in a certain way it's a unique event. Where we have the main perpetrator of that event, which was Germany under Adolf Hitler, coming to the realization after the Second World War that it was indeed responsible for the suffering that it had caused. So in a lot of ways, when you're dealing with that particular history, or when you're dealing with the history of the Holocaust, although there are some people still who will deny that happened, and I think with less and less survivors of that particular conflict being able to speak out and being able to go into classrooms and talk about their experiences in classrooms, that you are seeing that narrative being attacked slightly more often. And that comes out of ideological reasons for the most part, because I don't think there has ever been a war where there is so much documentation from all sides, also from the Nazi side, as to what happened during that conflict. So in a lot of ways, it's for European civilization, because it was such a world war, it's easier to have that conversation. The conversation with respect to that particular history is, how do you best educate young people to take responsibility for promoting peace and promoting human rights and making sure that never happens again? I think there's a huge difference between that particular conflict, which almost everybody can agree on, right? There's this very little disagreement.
I said global consensus,
Pretty much global consensus on that. Then when you're dealing with the conflict that took place in Bosnia-Herzegovina at that time, and I think that the key to, but this is me speaking from my own experience in different societies, that part of the key, there are different aspects to this. One is to make sure that people from different sides of the conflict who are teachers, because we're talking about education, that they have the opportunity to listen to each other. That's still not happening enough anywhere. So that means for educators that are working with young people, the key is not necessarily to try to push one's own narrative. The key is not to try to convince students to think one way or the other, even though as human beings we have our own opinion, right? And we have our own beliefs, and we try to push those beliefs on others. It's part of what we do as a human being, because we feel strongly. Oftentimes the connection is emotional. This is not just cognitive. Yeah. It's not just about facts. It's something that is emotional in us. Also for teachers as well. Teachers are human beings. They have parents who were part of that conflict, whatever side that was. This conflict impacted their families. It impacted them depending on their age in different ways. But one thing that in education, in terms of methodologies, is so critical is not just putting people in the same space. That's not what I mean.
Even though it's also important.
It's important to be in the same space, but sometimes being in the same space and not listening to each other, not truly listening to each other, and trying to park one's judgment. Now that is something that's not easy to do, but there are methodologies that can be used for that. It's just to listen to the other and try to and this is what they do very, very well, I have to say, in the Middle East. If you look at the more successful projects that come out of Israel and Palestine, there are many, hand-to-hand school, for instance, in Jerusalem, that they are able to bring young people together and also teachers and adults together. By the way, it's not widespread, but it does happen, and it's done very well. Okay. Is to bring young people and teachers together and to purely allow them to listen to each other and active listening, so not just shutting down, parking their judgment as much as possible. It's not easy to do that because, like I said, there are emotions involved. And to just listen to not only what the person is saying, but also how this particular conflict influenced them and their family. Really interesting initiative. I always love these initiatives I've seen that I can see have an impact. There in Israel, Palestine, is where they have Israeli youth interview the parents of Palestinian youth. And they interview them about their past and their experiences with previous conflicts, and they're just interviewing them and recording that. And then the Palestinian youth do it the same with the Israeli parents of these youth. So they do this project, and what you see when they do this kind of project, and here in Bosnia-Herzegovina it might be multiple narratives, of course, is at the very personal level. So it's no longer abstract. It's no longer facts, because facts don't convince. We're very immune. We are very immune as human beings to facts. We are much more convinced if we can make that personal connection. Because personal connections also mean an emotional bond that you create with the person that you're interviewing at that time. So what happens there is they do let's say the Palestinian youth interview the Israeli parent. They get all this information, oftentimes information that the parents have never passed on to their kids either. It's not, teenagers don't like to share information with their parents usually, and I can tell you out of experience. So, but having some stranger come into the house who is from a different faction with different beliefs and different experiences is an opportunity also for, let's say, the Israeli parent to talk to a teenager who's Palestinian. And they've never done that before for the most part, because we're all in our own communities. We're in our communities physically, and we are in our own communities even more, perhaps, than that online, and our little, what they call now, echo chambers. We are only interacting with people who share our opinion. So when they do this in Israel-Palestine, the young people come together, and then they share the stories with each other. And what you then find is that the Palestinian youth have learned a lot about the family of the Israeli young person that the Israeli young person had very little knowledge of. And this is a bonding moment. This is where they also understand it's not about the facts. It's a fact that we're human beings, and we have our own experiences, and it's making it very personal and recognizing and acknowledging that there is pain on all sides, and recognizing that pain and seeing that pain as legitimate, the fears that existed at the time, no matter who we see as perpetrator and victim, recognizing that the fears that were there, the pain that is there, is already a real step in reconciliation, because that's what's going to be needed, is that recognition. And that's what many people want. They want that recognition of what happened to me, what happened to my family, what happened to my community. Not necessarily taking on the narrative as such, but recognizing there is another narrative, and that this is something that needs to be recognized. Yeah.
And now I'm pretty angry about the idea that now I see when you talk about it. I see the way I see the people of Bosnia having conversation together. Really, facts does not convince. That's beautiful, but emotions and personal stories do. But what we're gonna do about these dark forces who are pulling it back to the narratives that they want to have at the moment?
Well, that's a political question more than anything else. I think if we're talking about education and educators, I think it's important for teachers and educators to try to create the kinds of safe spaces in classrooms, and that's not always so easy, where these kinds of conversations can be had with young people about what you call dark forces or different influences from different sides. I think like I said, as educators, and I'm an educator too, we have our principles, we have our values, we have the narratives that we prefer, and the question is then, to what extent do we actually share those with the students? They might have very different views coming from their homes as well. To what extent do we push our own values and our own views? Now, teenagers are not stupid for the most part. They can see through something that's not authentic. But I think for teachers, it's a key to try as much as possible to really push critical thinking among young people, to push reflection, and there are multiple aspects to all this. But I think, in my own opinion, having worked with many organizations, as much as possible, trying to create that space where you do not so much present your own opinion, because the minute you present your own opinion or your own ideology, no matter what that is, some students will feel excluded, and they're not going to share. They're not going to be willing to express what they really feel about this. Now, these forces you're talking about, you call them dark forces. If we want to promote critical thinking, one of the real places that there are threats now that we see in society is online. At the very personal level, at the very the experience level of young people in a classroom, this oftentimes refers to the kind of cyberbullying that might be taking place. And cyberbullying is very different, of course, than traditional bullying, because it's 24/7. It happens nonstop. You can't escape it that easily, whereas traditional bullying was happening in the school or in the playground. But also the propaganda and the disinformation that you see everywhere online. I already mentioned these echo chambers that people go to, and young people, of course, form certain cliques. There are extremists. I won't go beyond that. There are extremists that know that they can reach young people through the internet. They can reach them through social media, and they will go looking for vulnerable young people. They're quite sophisticated sometimes. I say And you're seeing a lot of that at the moment taking place, and this new conflict that is happening in the Ukraine. The amount of propaganda and disinformation is enormous. But what does that mean for an educator? When as an educator, you know that young people are being influenced by this, they're being reached by this, they're going online, they're seeing this information, maybe in school, maybe at home as well, probably at home, and the parents are online as well. So this is where a lot of this influence is now taking place. It's really shifted to that. It's no longer the posters that you have along the road. It's no longer in the textbook so much. It's really, for the most part, online. And so what does this mean as an educator? It means having a certain amount of skills, some competences we call them, to be able to work with young people and helping them understand and gain awareness of what is disinformation, what is propaganda online, and it's not as what. And some of it's fact checking. So this is being argued. Is this really true? Is this not true? That can be done with pure fact checking, but like I said, facts don't always work so well. So it goes beyond this kind of fact checking, this kind of awareness. It's trying to also working with young people, by the way, who know much more, and I can say almost any 13-year-old knows more than I do at the moment about how to navigate, what we call navigate the digital world. It's helping them not only become aware that there is a lot of propaganda and disinformation out there, but also what are the motivations? Why do people put out false and fake information? Why would they on earth want to do this? Obviously, they want to. There's an ideological reason. There's a goal for putting out all this information, and trying to recognize what is that motivation. If young people can understand, and also teachers, that there's a certain amount of motivation and ideology behind putting all this information out, that's an important first step. But that's a certain skill. It's not so easy as a teacher to know how to work with young people around the kind of disinformation that's there. The more successful projects in trying to combat some of these extremist messages that are out there at the moment are what they call it debunking. So debunking and pre-bunking. So the pre-bunking is very important. It's for educators working with young people, creating, first of all, like I said, that safe space where students can feel that they can express themselves, no matter how we feel about what they're about to say, that we don't judge them right away, that we don't criticize them right away, that we find it extremely important that they are expressing what they're seeing online. They don't always like to talk about what they're seeing online. So that is an important step for a lot of young people. That digital universe that they're in, that is the youth universe, right? Teachers don't really belong there somehow. They don't always like to share what they're seeing online. So that's the first challenge, getting young people to talk about what they're seeing, the kind of sites they're willing to talk about that they go to, what kind of information is there, and how do they know that information is correct. If we're talking about controversial issues, if we're talking about political issues, if we're talking about historical issues, if we're talking about interpretations of the conflict, for instance, that took place here, how do we as educators help young people understand where they can go? What is a reliable site? What is reliable information? How do we go to 4 or 5 different sites, those that are the most reliable, and see if the narrative there and see if the information there is the same? It's not, by the way, I can tell you now, it's not the same. That in itself is already an accomplishment. If young people can go to 5 different websites from different sources and realize, hey, there's different information here.
Something's
different
wrong
things,
about it.
not only certain things are highlighted, certain things they're presenting facts. Are they really facts? And their opinions, making it a distinction between facts and opinions. What are the facts here, and what kind of facts are they, and what kind of opinions are there? That already gets them to think critically about what they're finding online. So there's that aspect. Then the pre-bunking, I mentioned pre-bunking, and pre-bunking is warning young people already in advance, you are going to find this kind of information. And these are the kinds of arguments that will probably be used. And these are why these arguments are going to be used. And these are the purposes of these arguments. This is what they're trying to accomplish with these kinds of arguments. That kind of pre-bunking is fairly effective. Fairly effective. Nothing is perfect, of course.
I'm sad that we didn't have opportunity to hang out before, because we share a lot of we came from same paradigm, including this concept of critical thinking, including the concepts of how we can. There was a huge topic in Bosnia about de-radicalization,
Right.
5 years ago, and it's still ongoing. And we pushed the agenda, the only concepts of critical thinking, and schools as a safe place where children do belong and feel that they belong there can be one of the predictors how you can how you can work on it with the children without mentioning the concepts of de-radicalization and some and kind of that.
Well, they won't understand what that means anyway.
They don't understand. But
Right.
the concepts of critical thinking are universal. Concepts of belonging and safety are universal. But can I just add one more layer of complexity? There was in 2018 in Bosnia and Herzegovina the first and last one PISA research here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we got catastrophic results. We got the results that almost 50% of our children are functionally illiterate. So they basically do not understand the concept. They can repeat it, they can do different things about it, but on a higher level of thinking, they cannot reach that. And especially the maybe most catastrophic information and data that we got from that is that actually we don't have kids on an extreme high level of thinking. So when we talk about this, and you said the critical thinking is one of the essential skills that both teachers and children do need. What we're going to do when we have almost every second child cannot do that. They cannot reach that level. Then when you put these complex topics in this complex environment, what you got?
I can also go back to PISA, which has now some questions on being able to recognize disinformation and propaganda. There's something called the Media Literacy Index. I don't know where Bosnia-Herzegovina stands on that, but it's something to look at in the future. So I think the big challenge for any educator anywhere and any teacher anywhere is how to motivate students to want to learn. First of all, one thing I think we have to recognize is that any kid, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, they're not stupid, they're not dumb, they can learn. If they can learn and they can excel, and they can do as well as, let's say, students in Hong Kong or Finland, they score at the very top, Finland and Estonia in Europe. What are their secrets? What do they do in other places that is so effective? And I think if you look at, I'll just take the Finnish example for a second, because everybody's so shocked that the Finns do so well and that they don't have any school inspectorate. There's nobody that inspects the school in Finland. And they don't have many tests and they don't have many exams. And so how on earth do the Finns score so well? And the Estonians, Estonia, by the way, they took the Finnish model and improved it a little bit. What do they do that's so different from what they do in other countries? And I'll include, the Netherlands, where I'm from, which scores fairly okay, but not that well compared to Finland, is they create an environment where students, and it's a real aim of the school, to create an environment in the school where the kids have a sense of belonging. This is my space. Where the walls, if you go into a school, are full of their products that they've created. So there's a certain pride in the school and a pride in the kind of work that they've created. And they make, and this is, in some places that people don't understand, they make it kind of fun. They really want the kids to be motivated. More than anything else, they want the kids to be motivated. They want them to learn through project-based learning. So the kids are engaged in all kinds of projects in the school, out of the school. They're constantly looking at the learning process. They're constantly looking at, and this is something they do, by the way, there, but also in Norway, where every year they ask the kids from a young age, how do you feel in the school? Do you feel accepted? Are there areas of the school that you think are dangerous? Do the teachers treat you with respect? And so they ask the question every single year of the kids. And then there's, of course, they bring it all together and they look at how are we doing as a school? Are we creating that kind of a learning environment where the kids are prospering, where they're motivated, where they want to learn, where they accept each other as well? And they make the adjustments based on that. But so much of it is based on not kids being stressed out all the time, having to pass a test, having to, we call remote learning. Mm-hmm. So they're just studying the materials and studying the facts and studying the information, but much more based on analyzing the information, working with the information, young people interviewing their parents, young people interviewing each other, young people making presentations, giving them responsibility for their own learning. They enjoy that tremendously when they're given that kind of responsibility, and it motivates them. So that I have to say that works well. It works, no, nothing's perfect. Works extremely well in a context like Finland, where they have a lot of freedom. One of the real challenges in so many countries across Europe and other countries even more so, is that the system can be fairly rigid, and teachers don't have the kind of freedom that they need to do these kinds of projects. And in that way, you're reaching the limits of what teachers can do. Teachers everywhere will say, number one, I'm overburdened. I have to stick to the curriculum. I don't want to be, especially when you're talking about controversial issues and issues that really excite young people. Some kids are fascinated by math, but I would say almost every kid is interested in what's happening in their community and in their environment, especially if they go into the community and they interview the parents and they do research in the community. That connects them to the community. They really enjoy anything that's interactive. But if you don't have that opportunity, then it's really it's wrestling with the way of making the material that is there, that's being required, given the limited time you have, given in the restrictions that you have, to make that really interesting for young people. And that means fitting in as much as possible interactive methods, whether that's cooperative learning, whether that's project-based learning, into this fairly rigid curriculum. And I understand it's relatively rigid here.
We don't have it.
So
we don't have a concept of curriculum. We have a concept of something called plan for the school, but it's not child-centered. It's teacher-centered, comparing to the curriculum, and outcomes in that way are not defined. They're defined towards teacher, not towards children. Yeah,
it's a real challenge for teachers to give up some of their authority and control in the classroom. I think that goes for any teacher. Yeah. I think it's what you're seeing in the more successful and learning environments around the globe, by the way, is where teachers cede, so they give up some of that control, which is not an easy thing to do, because it's nice to know exactly where everybody's sitting and what they're doing, and
it's a matter of power, actually.
It's surrendering a little bit of your power, realizing it's not necessarily surrendering your power and your leadership role in the classroom or in the school. It's redefining it.
Yep.
Seeing yourself as a teacher, as a person who's facilitating a process where the students are responsible for their own learning, and also is helping each other with that kind of, which means more noise, more interaction, monitoring who is taking the lead, making sure that every student is engaged. That is a very different role for a teacher, this facilitation role, than the teacher who's standing there lecturing at the students and getting students to raise their hand if they want to say something. That's a transition. That's not an easy thing to do. And it's important also, if at all possible, that the heads of schools need to support that, ministries need to support that. With that lacking, it's a real challenge for teachers to be able to make that transition. However, that transition is becoming, it was always important. I mean, in the last couple decades, if you look around Europe, that transition slowly has been happening, where students are responsible for their own learning and teachers as facilitators in the classroom. But now with the new digital universe, and especially with COVID, where so much education was happening at home and was happening remotely, that push has been even stronger, where students have had to take more responsibility for the learning, and the teachers have not even been there physically. So in a situation where students know more about the digital universe, are more equipped, more skilled in going online and finding whatever information they find online, whether that's extremist information or whether that's educational information. That transition is more important. What you do see as well is that, as I mentioned, that during the COVID epidemic, that students were online more often for educational purposes. That as well has been a real challenge for young people, because if you go back 3-4 years, the only reason they were really using the internet and the reason they were using social media was to contact friends and have fun and get into trouble sometimes, people say as well. So yeah, and young people do get into trouble, obviously. I mentioned already cyberbullying, extremist messages, but they get in trouble in different ways. And parents don't have those skills and capacities either, for the most part. The unique thing we have, the unique situation in the school, is that there is a certain amount of monitoring that's happening in the school when it comes to the internet, when it comes to the digital universe, and it's a unique opportunity for teachers to engage with young people and trying to use it responsibly and respectfully. Where else is that going? It's not going to happen anywhere else. Where else would that happen?
I do agree.
But in the schools. But it also means that space has to be made in that very busy schedule that teachers have. Space has to be made for that to take place. So that means, how do you integrate that kind of work with the digital universe in history
back to the school?
Yeah, how do you do that in the classroom? What opportunities do you provide after school for the kids, even for the parents, if you have time? But I see people getting tired already. Really, I have to talk to the parents about this as well. It costs energy, and teachers are already overburdened, like I said. But nevertheless, it is the one place where we have some control and some kind of monitoring that's taking place with respect to this digital universe. And so therefore, there's an incredible opportunity and also a responsibility, I think, if we want to promote a democratic society. That is where that needs to happen, not elsewhere, because it's not going to happen elsewhere. Students are not going to, outside of the school, educate each other about this. So therefore,
they will educate it, however,
and in a different kind of way. Like I said, they'll get into trouble. They'll get into trouble, and so that is a real challenge. But it's something that has to happen sooner or later.
I just don't see an option B.
No, there is no option B.
I just don't see option B. We have to do everything what's in our power to transform the schools. Let me go back shortly on while you were developing introduction. I gave information to the people about you, what you did, and one of the things that I mentioned is that you developed a curriculum for the Anne Frank House and teacher training programs. So what was in your head while developing it? What filters? What expectations? What you want teachers and maybe children who were part of the Anne Frank's house to feel, to experience, and so on. And while we are maybe it's important for you to understand at this moment in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in different places, we are doing this curricular reform about certain subjects and so on and so on. And it's really important for us to find out about the how people develop curriculums. What are the steps for developing curriculums? It's 101, let's say, like that.
Well, with respect to the Anne Frank House, and I was responsible for teacher education internationally there, I think there are different things that we were aiming for. I think one of the main aims was to help teachers use materials that are interactive, that are engaging for their students, and to gain the confidence. So it's building self-confidence, it's building their capacity, and also building a network for them to work with each other. The self-confidence issue was very much focused on, okay, there are materials out there. There are a lot of materials online. There are print materials that are there as well. But which of these materials are really useful? Which of them are really going to be effective? What about my own teaching methodologies? Are they effective? And so a lot of it was built on if we're dealing with controversial issues, anything, I think, when you're dealing with citizenship, civics, and if you do history correctly, and I think especially in a country like Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's a certain amount of, when you're dealing with controversial issues, avoidance is probably the best way to do, the easiest way to deal with this. Let's just avoid the topic altogether because, I am a psychologist, I'm a social psychologist, but most teachers are not psychologists. So they're running a certain amount of risk the minute you bring in a controversial issue and you have a mixed group of students in the classroom. There's always a risk involved of something becoming emotional, of something becoming controversial, and also of parents getting involved because not all parents appreciate talking about some of these controversial issues either. So for the easiest approach for a teacher is just to say, I'm not going to do this at all. I'm going to avoid this. Nevertheless, all the work that I've done around this, if you ask teachers, is it important to do this work? Yes, it's important to do this work. We need to do this work, but why me? Many teachers have had some experience dealing with controversial issues in the classroom, and it's exploded in their face. It's gone wrong. So all it needs to happen is for this to go wrong once, if you're talking about any one of these controversial issues, either for parents to be involved or arguments in the classroom or the head teacher saying, what's going on in the classroom. One of the kids came and complained about this. You're indoctrinating them. And I do want to say that this is an important distinction between propaganda and education, or indoctrination and education. I think education and teachers are educators means, and I mentioned before, critical thinking, not necessarily taking as a teacher a position on a certain issue, even if it's human rights, which I firmly believe in, but have these children arrive at that themselves, through exercises, but allowing them the space to discover the importance, for instance, of human rights, having them discover the kinds of different arguments that are used when you're dealing with controversial issues and recognizing that there are these different arguments. So in the classroom, and this is what I was doing at the Anne Frank, it's presenting some of these methodologies which promote active listening, because that goes for all of us, right? And I'm the first one in talking with people who might differ from me in my opinion, where I want to jump in. And I don't listen really necessarily. Very few of us do. It's not in our DNA to just, maybe at least not in I'll just call it Western culture for the moment. I think there's some cultures where listening is extremely important and seen as a moral imperative to listen to others. But let's say in Europe, it's not part of the culture is to just carefully listen, reflect back as to what you heard, because if you do an exercise oftentimes then, what did I just say? People totally misinterpret what you said as well. So it's creating those opportunities in the classroom where, in the training I was doing at the Anne Frank House, to promote active listening, to discuss using certain methodologies, how you can discuss and debate these different kinds of opinions that are there, and how to have the confidence to do that. Have the confidence to do that without fearing that there are going to be reprisals. And part of that is creating the network, right? Creating the network of and being open and honest that, okay, I'm going to try this methodology and it might backfire completely. And better understanding why it might have backfired, why this went wrong, and supporting each other and not giving up. Because the easiest thing to do for anybody, and we all know that when we try something new and it goes wrong, we go back to our old ways, and
that works.
Well, it doesn't work. It works for us at that moment, but medium and long term, it doesn't work. And I think all teachers and all educators are aimed at helping their young people become active citizens, helping to build democracy and democratic values in their society, helping to build understanding beyond then just purely them learning math and learning science. We want them to be responsible citizens, and if there are people who can go into the community and create a better community, let's not talk about a better world, but creating a better, more respectful community, that's a stepping stone to creating a better world. And that goes beyond just studying math and science and these pure facts. Pure facts, it's nice to know some of these facts, but they're oftentimes factoids. There's no connection between the facts. But it's the confidence that the teachers need to do this kind of work. And if teachers have that confidence to do this kind of work and they can pass on some of that responsibility to the students for their own learning, that builds the confidence of the students as well. And if they have the confidence, if they have the motivation, and then we get full circle here, and they want to learn, and learning is exciting. Learning has to be exciting. It can't be boring.
Yes.
If learning is exciting and it connects to their world in a certain way as well, we can't deny the kind of world that they're living in, the kind of concerns that they have, and it keeps us young when we try to better understand that as well. If we can open ourselves up as educators to the kinds of issues that concern them and work with them on those kinds of issues, and I'll give you an example in a second, they will be motivated and they will want to learn. Not every person all the time,
course.
Not every student all the time, but a large number of them will. So I knew a teacher, and funny enough, this teacher was in Cuba, but she was very creative. And at the very beginning of the year, and she was teaching English, and she would do a little survey with the students, and she'd say, "Okay, students, what would you like to learn about this year? What are we going to learn about?" At the very beginning of the school year. And, well, this is the Cuban situation, right? So the Cuban situation, well, teacher, we want to learn about dating, okay? And we want to learn about tourism. Those were two issues. Teenagers want to know about dating and about the other sex, right? That's what they want to learn about. She said, okay, let's be safe here. Let's do tourism. So this year, what we're going to focus on in English class is we're going to deal with tourism. And I'm taking it upon myself to find literature and texts and projects that all deal with tourism. And they said, okay. This gave them buy-in at the very beginning of the year into how they're going to study that. She was a little bit challenged trying to fit that into the kind of, they call benchmarks that they had, but she was able to do it. It took some time, it took some energy, and it took a few weekends for her to find that. But the end result was that the students that's just one example, were extremely motivated.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You have to promise us that you will come again.
This is the start.
Believe or not, this is already close
Okay.
to more than an hour. So I'm really depressed that we didn't tackle so many important issues and questions
For the listeners or viewers of this, when he gave me those questions, I said that's 4 or 5 hours. And I really enjoy the conversation. And like I said, it's an ongoing conversation.
It is. Next time we're going to talk about intercultural education. How do you understand it? How we treat intercultural and multicultural. Is there any difference and so on? How to co-construct the process that works. I would love next time to speak about 2 of your books.
Sure.
One of confronting Islamophobia in educational practice, and another is challenging homophobia, teaching about sexual diversity. Those are again two things that I want to talk about next time. But for the end, do you have some instant advices how to for the teachers how to talk about this Russian invasion at this moment, because it's important for the children. They're hearing the news, they're hearing the information, but we do not tackle those issues at the school. And another thing, that's how we end every podcast. It's for you to recommend us at least 2 books to read. We would love.
I think in terms of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and I think we can call it that. It's so fresh and it's so new, and I think that one thing I would ask teachers to do at the moment, because I mentioned already disinformation and propaganda, and because students are being exposed to that all the time, if they go online, is to try to collect for themselves the kinds of messages that they're seeing in the media, the kinds of images that they're seeing in the media, and to just discuss with the students, create some space and some time to to discuss that with the students and try to slowly work towards how they feel about the kind of messages they're seeing and the kind of images they're seeing. I wouldn't start with any in-depth analysis. If people do want an in-depth analysis, I think they should look at the history of the Ukraine, because there's so much disinformation about the history of the Ukraine that's coming out of Russia at the moment. So looking carefully at that aspect, and also trying to, there's so many things they can do, because I know refugees are flooding into Europe at the moment. Looking at refugees past and present, looking at, and let's not forget that many people from Bosnia and Herzegovina also were refugees, and can better than anybody maybe understand what that's like in Europe. In any case, trying to understand what is it like being a refugee, what are these experiences like, and in some cases they can even ask their parents about that, right? Because that's what you're looking at. I'm not going to recommend books as such. I think I'm going to recommend two sources that connect to that as well. And I would recommend that teachers read the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees, to look at refugee rights. That would be, let me just leave it at that. That one, if they can do that, I think that's a really important discussion with their students. This is the UN Convention. Actually, there were some conventions after that as well. And just have a discussion with them. Why is that important? And how does that relate to your parents' experience or your grandparents' experience, and your family histories? If they can do that, so not just that document or one book, that document, and connecting that one document, on refugee rights from 1951 UN. Look at some videos. There's some great animated videos that they can watch in school on the Convention of the Right, on the UN Convention on Refugees. Have them look at that. Have them discuss that, and have them relate that to what they're seeing in the world today. That would be a lot. That they can find the space to do that, especially if they're teaching history or citizenship. But that can also happen in the literature class. That's what I would recommend.
Privileged to have you here. Thank you very much and
Step one.
See you soon.
All right.
Dragi prijatelji, bio je to uvaženi Driel. Razgovarali smo o konceptima kako razgovarati o vrlo teškim temama, razgovarali smo o metodologiji izrade kurikuluma, pogotovo za Anne Frank kuću, odnosno muzej. Nadam se drugom susretu, računamo sve da bude drugi susret, nepresušan izbor ideja, promišljanja za nastavnike. Ako išta ostaje od svega ovoga, onda je da krajnje vrijeme da počnemo promišljati koja je to naša uloga, odnosno uloga nastavnika, drugačija od ono na koju smo navikli ili na koju smo naučeni. Dobri ljudi, hvala puno i vidimo se naredne srede.